Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Samurai Goddess. The Goddess Next Door takes on Kung Fu killers in this action-packed martial arts Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Samurai Goddess in paperback and e-readers today. The mainstream media has been reporting an uptick in violent attacks on Asian Americans based on race. And in many of these reports, the mainstream media has been pushing a narrative that black people are the perpetrators in many of these crimes. However, when I take a critical examination of many of these news reports and the video of these alleged assaults, I oftentimes don't see black people perpetrating these assaults on Asian Americans. Oftentimes in the video, I'm seeing white Americans perpetrating these crimes on Asians. I'm seeing non-blacks like Hispanics, Arabs, and Indians perpetrating these crimes on Asian Americans. And I'm seeing a lot of Asian on Asian violence. However, the narrative that the news wants to push is that black people are the perpetrators of these crimes. However, there's no real evidence to show that black people are perpetrating these crimes, and it looks like to me that the mainstream media is trying to gaslight the public into believing that black people are perpetrating these crimes. Now, gaslighting is when an individual tries to make a person believe a lie is the truth, and that's what I'm seeing with the mainstream media doing right now by trying to push this narrative that black people are the perpetrators of crimes on Asian Americans, even though there is clear video evidence to show that these perpetrators are primarily white, non-black, or even Asian. And I believe that part of this has to do with the mainstream media wanting to demonize the image of black people, because oftentimes in your mainstream media, they want to make black people, especially heterosexual black men, to be the boogeyman. And I believe there's also an issue with your Asian Americans who have a fear of confronting white Americans. Now, in Asian culture, there, especially Chinese and Korean culture, there's a whole narrative as related to white people, and a lot of people look up to white people. So a lot of Asian Americans, they have a fear of alienating white people by confronting white Americans about their anti-Asian violence. So when I look at this whole case, it's like a lot of Asians are afraid of confronting white people because white supremacy runs deep in Asian culture, and that can be seen in things like the mangas and animes where many of the characters have white features instead of Asian features. And in many Asian cultures like China and Japan and Korea, a lot of the Asian people, again, they look up to white people, so they're afraid of confronting those white people about their racism. And instead of them confronting those white people about their racism, what they do is project those feelings and those issues they have about white people onto black people, and they want to make the black man the bad guy in the situation, because the black man being the bad guy is the standard and the norm here in America, and they want to go out here and again project that onto the black man. But the whole thing is, when we look at the evidence in the videos, it shows us that the black man is not the bad guy in these stories. The bad guy is white, non-black, or Asian, and in many cases it's white Americans who are perpetrating this violence, and it is white Americans who have the most motivation to participate in this trend as related to anti-Asian violence, because many of these white Americans are angry because they have been fed a lot of misinformation as related to the COVID-19 pandemic, and because they have been fed this misinformation about the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of these white Americans who have lost their jobs and are struggling, they are looking for somebody to blame, and their motivation is to attack Asian Americans through this racial violence. But what we have is here is, instead of these Asian people confronting these white racist Americans. They want to go out here and try to turn it on black people and make black people the scapegoat for this violence. They want to project the issue onto black people, and that just again is cowardly as I see it, because you don't want to confront this white man because you don't want to lose face in front of him, and because you don't want to lose face in front of this white man, you want to go out here and blame the black man. So that's what's going on as related to a lot of this anti-Asian violence. A lot of these Asians don't want to confront this white man about the racism he perpetrates on Asian people, and they are afraid of losing their favored status because, again, in Asian culture, Asian people are afraid of losing face, and they fear if they confront this white man, they will lose their favored minority status here in America because they fear that the white supremacist will punish them. So they enter into a covert contract with the white supremacist to give him a pass for his racism and make the black man the bad guy so that they can continue receiving benefits from the white supremacist. So your Asian American refuses to confront this white man, and they refuse to hold him accountable for his violence against Asian Americans, and they want to make an imaginary story into reality. They want to gaslight people into believing black people are the face of anti-Asian violence. However, when we look at the videos all across the country, the evidence shows us a completely different story. Now, there have been Asian businesses in neighborhoods like the one I've lived in for years. Asians have run things like the beauty supply stores, the nail salons, and the toy stores here in places like the Bronx for years. And many black Americans have never, ever once perpetrated any sort of violence on an Asian American in these areas for 30 or 40 years. If anything, it is the Asian store owners who go out of their way to assault black Americans in places like these nail salons and these weave shops. And many black people, they wanted to get justice but never got any justice because the criminal justice system would go out here and dismiss the charges against Asian Americans in places like these nail salons where people have been assaulted by these Asian women in these stores or these men in these stores. Or we have cases like the case of Akai Gurley, where Peter Liang practically got away with the murder of Akai Gurley, even though the evidence showed that your Peter Liang practically violated this man's rights. He got away with murdering this man. And when we look at the case of your Daniel Holtzclaw, a man who participated in sexual violence against black women, he got away with those crimes for years before finally getting arrested, tried, and convicted. When it came down to most black people were out here being victimized by many of these Asian Americans in these stores, or people like your Peter Liang or your Daniel Holtzclaw. And most black people never retaliated in any way, shape, or form. So that really refutes that whole theory about, black people being the ones behind this uptick in Asian violence, because there was no motive for it over the last 30 years, and there has been no motive for it in the last 2 years. I mean, if we look at most of the data overall, clearly black people aren't the ones perpetrating these crimes or being the ones motivated to commit these types of crimes. If anything, it is whites and non-blacks who lost their jobs during the pandemic and wound up struggling economically, being the motivation for much of this violence. And if it was, because when I'm looking at the statistics, the numbers, again, really don't add up on this story. But if we look at the motive for it, it primarily has to do with white Americans. And nobody, again, in the Asian community, as I see it, wants to confront white Americans by themselves. What they want to do now is talk about Asian Black coalition, but there's no reason for black people to become part of any coalition, really, because these Asian Americans, in many cases, have gone out here and done harm to the black community, taking away the hair care industry from black Americans, assaulting black Americans in their stores, going out here murdering black Americans and denying us justice in the case of Akai Gurley and Latasha Harlins, and going out here and terrorizing black women like Daniel Holtzclaw did. Most black Americans are saying, hey, there's no reason for us to have a coalition with you when you've been doing harm to black Americans for years. And many black Americans, we are not the scapegoat in this case, because we're not the ones perpetrating this violence, and we don't have a motivation to do so. So when we look at this again, this trend as related to this media, you can just clearly see a narrative being pushed to, again, demonize black people. And that motive to demonize black people, again, comes from the fear of many Asians of confronting white Americans, because they don't want to lose face. They don't want to lose favored status socially with white people, because many people want to get into white social circles and gain white acceptance, and they fear if they stand up for their rights, they will be punished by the system of white supremacy. So they fear being punished by these white Americans, and that's the reason why they don't want to confront these white Americans face to face by themselves. No, they want to try to build a coalition to bring black people in, but how can you ask people who you attacked for many years to form a coalition with you when you've disrespected them? That's a critical question I have to ask many of those Asian leaders out here. How can you ask black Americans to form a coalition with you when you've disrespected black Americans for over 30 years in your businesses, and you've had a completely anti-black racist culture in many of your countries like China and Korea, where you have, again, gone out here and attacked Africans. You have presented negative images of black people. And in some countries like Nigeria, you have denied black people access to businesses because you didn't want to see black people in them. So how can you ask black people to go out here and support you when you've gone out here and disrespected black people? And how can you push a narrative that black people are the ones, again, doing harm to Asian people when the evidence just doesn't show it? So when I look at this whole media piece as related to this uptick in anti-Asian crimes, I just find it to be a suspect narrative, because when I look at the evidence as related to many of these cases, it's showing me that it's whites and non-blacks perpetrating in these crimes, but there's a clear campaign to gaslight people into believing black people are the boogeyman, black people are the bad guy, and black people need to be eradicated. And this is all about, again, pushing more anti-black narratives and trying to make black people the villain of a story that we never had any participation in. And when you look at the evidence in these cases, you can clearly see that this isn't the case. And what's really interesting is that in every case that they try to make it about race with white people, they always try to turn it into a black narrative. And again, that's about this fear of confronting the real racist in the room and really confronting that racist and holding them accountable for their hatred of Asian Americans. No one wants to confront the white man and the white woman regarding their racism, because in some cases, many of these people, they're afraid of losing things. But the whole thing is, you're losing your dignity, you're losing your self-respect, and you're losing your credibility because you don't want to confront this person, this white racist, about his white supremacy. And the reason why you don't want to confront this white supremacist is because you don't want to lose your benefits that you receive from this white supremacist in keeping black people at the bottom of the world. Now, if you want to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to pick up some of my positive stories about African Americans, like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, the John Haynes series, and the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, you can find those books on Amazon.com in paperback Kindle format, Smashwords, the iBook Store, and Google Play. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Coming to paperback and e-readers this April, ISIS, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess. The goddess next door must take on the threat of a deadly digital diva driven to destroy the world in this action-packed all-new ISIS series adventure. Get ISIS, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess in paperback and e-readers this April.